Welcome to The Bitter Witness.
Don't be scared.
Hello, welcome back. I'm Rebecca, and I'm your host for The Bitter Witness. I hope you've had a good week. I've had a busy week. I've been writing, and I also decided to take on a huge project in the backyard, and I've been plugging away at it slowly. Not too much going on in my little corner of Ontario. The heat has let up a little tiny bit, thank God, but it's still as hot as Satan's ass out there, so I'm still trying to stay inside as much as possible with my wonderful air conditioning. Let's see, what else do I have to tell you this week? Oh, I attended a wedding this past weekend, and I have to tell you one of the stories that came up as we were shooting the shit during the meal. Hi Kim. Kim pulled out her phone and showed us all this really weird looking shot of an x-ray. It was definitely a skull, but there were these two huge white, obviously metal, circles along either side of the nose. Of course, naturally, I was intrigued. Kim proceeds to inform us that this was an x-ray of her 13, 14-year-old, sorry Kim, I can't remember the age exactly, but it was her granddaughter. She had been putting a magnetic nose piercing in her nose, and essentially they went up her nose. But she didn't want to tell anyone what she had done because she didn't want to get into trouble. Now, don't even try and tell me that you didn't do something when you were 13 or 14 years old and it didn't work, and then you did something even stupider to hide it, because we all have. Finally, she told her mother, and off they went to the hospital, but they couldn't get these stupid magnets out with any tools that they had at the hospital. Can you imagine the pain this poor girl was going through? I asked, why didn't they just grab two magnets and put them on either side of her nose and slide these ones out? And apparently they tried that, but those nose magnets were so strong they wouldn't budge. Eventually, they doped the poor little girl up to the hilt and went in and mined those suckers out. I'm telling you, we were in stitches while Kim was telling us this story. So I asked Kim, of course, if I could mention this on the podcast and share it with all of you, and I received her blessing. You know, men have no idea the pain we girls go through for beauty. Fuck you, beauty industry. I know this episode is a little bit late, but there was a lot of research involved in this episode. I apologize for the lateness, but I think you'll enjoy this one. It's insane. So let's take care of business, shall we? If you enjoy this episode or any other episode, please head over to the Patreon page and join us as a subscriber. You really will help the show by doing that. Keeps the lights on and allows me to keep bringing you new content each week. Also, if you're listening on Apple, please give the show a 5-star review. If you have any ideas for a future episode, or if you just want to drop me a line and say, hey, I'm listening, you can email me at thebitterwitness@gmail.com. That's enough of that for today. The dogs are sleeping behind me, so Puppy ASMR will be brought to you by both Miley and Piper this week. So grab a cup of tea, sit back, and relax while I tell you the case of Jesse Tafero and Sonny Jacobs. The phrase, "the truth will set you free," echoes through generations, instilling in us a sense of hope and reassurance that honesty ultimately will prevail. Alongside it, the encouragement to have faith nurtures our belief in justice, integrity, and the inherent goodness of systems designed to uphold these values. However, the harsh reality can be disheartening when the truth is shrouded in silence or manipulation, leading to a profound sense of betrayal. When the institutions meant to protect us and uphold justice instead turn a blind eye, it can devastate our understanding of righteousness and erode our faith. This disillusionment plunges us into a state of confusion and helplessness as we grapple with the contradictions between the ideals we've been taught and the grim reality we witness. It raises crucial questions about the nature of justice itself. Is it truly blind, or does it selectively choose whom to protect? When faced with the ultimate penalty of death, the experience can feel overwhelmingly isolating. The visceral knowledge that one's life hangs in the balance, dictated by the deceit of another, breeds a profound sense of injustice. Coping in such an environment demands a deep reservoir of resilience. It becomes essential to channel anguish into a fight for justice. Wrongful convictions leading to the death penalty represent one of the most harrowing miscarriages of justice in contemporary legal systems. Innocent lives can be extinguished based on flawed evidence, unreliable testimonies, or systemic biases. Several high-profile cases have revealed how individuals were sentenced to death only to be exonerated posthumously. Jesse Tafero and Sonny Jacobs found themselves in this exact situation. In 1976, Jesse and Sonny were living in North Carolina with their 2 children, their son Eric, who was 9, and their daughter Christine, who was 10 months old. Times were tough for the family, and Jesse was looking for work. He received an offer of work down in Florida, and the couple decided that even though Jesse would be away from the family, it was the best decision for them. Jesse headed out for Florida, and the plan was for Sonny and the 2 kids to come down to Florida to pick Jesse up when the work was done. As agreed upon, Sonny and the 2 children drove down to Florida and picked Jesse up when he was finished the job. When Sonny and Jesse were about to head back to North Carolina, her car broke down. They had no way to get back to North Carolina. Jesse called on a guy he knew from work, one Walter Rhodes, and asked if he would be able to give Sonny and the kids and him a ride back to North Carolina. Rhodes agreed, and on February 20th, 1976, the 5 of them set out on the interstate towards North Carolina. Rhodes and Jesse in the front seat with Sonny and the 2 kids in the back. After driving for a few hours, the group decided to pull into a rest area, still in Florida, to get a little shut-eye. Everyone in the car fell asleep to get some much-needed rest. I would just like to point out that the entire purpose of a rest stop is to stop and get some rest. It's not illegal. It's what they're there for, so you don't cause an accident on the highway because you fell asleep at the wheel. Just putting that in there. At approximately 7:30 a.m., it was cooler than normal and very foggy. Sonny, Jesse, Rhodes, and the 2 kids were still sleeping in the car. And that is when a Florida Highway Patrol officer named Philip A. Black, a 9-year veteran with the Florida Highway Patrol, entered the rest area to do a routine check of the grounds. On that specific day, there was an officer from the OPP, or Ontario Provincial Police, riding along with Black. Corporal Donald Irwin, who was a good friend of Black's and on vacation at the time. Corporal Irwin was in civilian clothes and unarmed while performing the ride-along with Trooper Black. The 2 officers noticed an old Camaro in the rest area and decided to approach the car and check it out, as to them it seemed suspicious. The 2 officers exited the police car and approached the Camaro. They saw Sonny in the back seat sleeping with the 2 children, and Jesse and Rhodes in the front seat also sleeping. But then they saw a gun on the floor in between Rhodes's feet. Upon seeing the gun, the officers pulled the driver's door open and pulled Rhodes out of the car, then ordered Jesse out of the car. They instructed Sonny to stay with the children in the back seat. Sonny never left the back seat while the 2 officers were there. Officer Black came up to Jesse, asked him for his ID. Jesse was reluctant to give his ID to the officer as they really weren't doing anything wrong. Next, Black opened the back door of the car and started looking through the car in the back. Black found Sonny's purse, and when he stood up, he started going through Sonny's purse. Jesse became a little upset, as many of us probably would, and said, "Don't you need a warrant to be looking through my wife's purse?" According to Jesse's testimony, Black ignored Jesse's questions and continued searching through things. So Jesse asked again, which in turn seemed to aggravate Black. Black asked Jesse for his ID again, and Jesse stated he didn't have it on him. It was packed in the trunk with all the other stuff. According to Jesse's testimony, he kept asking the officer why he was searching through things, and Officer Black was getting more and more aggravated. According to Jesse and Sonny's testimonies, Irwin never identified who he was and wasn't wearing a uniform, just khaki shorts and a t-shirt. Eventually, Black came up to Jesse and pushed him, which at that point, Officer Irwin grabbed Jesse, pushed him over the hood of the car with his hands behind his back. Then, Officer Black went over to Rhodes and demanded Rhodes' identification. Rhodes complied, and Black went back to the police car and called in the ID to run a check on him. Black returned from the patrol car with his gun drawn and pointed at Rhodes, and stated that Rhodes was on parole. And if you know anything about the law, you know that someone who is on parole is not allowed to be in possession of a gun. According to Sonny, when Black got back to the car with his gun out, he stated, "Nobody move. The next person who moves is dead." Which I understand because they're kind of outnumbered 3-2, and they don't know if there's any other guns in the car or on Rhodes or on Jesse or on Sonny. They haven't searched everything completely, so that is understandable. Maybe a little harsh, but understandable. What happens next is literally the crux of this case. According to Sonny, after Black stated that no one was to move, there was gunfire immediately. And she dove and covered the children with her body in the back seat of the car. She kept her head down the entire time the gunshots were ringing out. According to 2 eyewitnesses who were truck drivers also in the rest stop, Officer Irwin had grabbed Jesse and pushed him over the hood of the Camaro, which is where, according to these eyewitnesses, Jesse remained for the entirety of the gunfight. These eyewitnesses stated in testimony that they didn't actually see where the gunfire came from, but stated in their testimony that it either came from the back seat of the Camaro or the back of the car. Remember, Sonny is in the back seat of the car covering the children. And also, according to these eyewitnesses, Rhodes had moved to the back of the Camaro. According to Sonny's testimony, when the shooting stopped, she looked up to see if Jesse was okay, and she saw him standing frozen in between the 2 cars, just in absolute shock, and both of the officers were dead on the ground. Next, Rhodes told Jesse to pick up all the shell casings that were on the ground and to get Sonny and the kids into the police cruiser. Sonny stated that Jesse came to the back door of the Camaro and told her, "We have to go with him. He has a gun." Sonny handed the baby out to Jesse and then put Eric on the ground outside the car. And when she did, the little boy slipped and fell into a pool of blood from the 2 officers. They snatched up Eric and ran to the police cruiser. With all of them inside the cruiser, Rhodes handed the gun to Jesse and took off like a bat out of hell. Sonny said at this point she was terrified and didn't know what to do. Jesse and her and the children had basically been taken hostage by Rhodes. After a few minutes of driving, Rhodes pulled into a parking lot of an apartment complex and parked the cruiser. He took the gun from Jesse and told Jesse to get out of the cruiser. Jessie and Rhodes were out of the cruiser, and Sunny thought to herself this was her chance to get her and the kids out of this nightmare. But you cannot open the doors from the inside in the back of a police cruiser. She and her babies were trapped. Outside of the cruiser, Rhodes approached an older man who was walking to the mailbox, Leonard Levinson. Rhodes had his gun drawn and demanded that Leonard take them to his car. Rhodes demanded the keys from Leonard, and when Leonard was hesitant to give his keys up to his car, according to Leonard's testimony, Jessie told Levinson that they had a sick child that they needed to get to the hospital. Levinson handed over the keys, and Rhodes forced him into his own car at gunpoint. According to Sunny, Rhodes started screaming at Jessie to get Sunny and the kids out of the cruiser and into the new car. Jessie told Sunny that they had to go with Rose, so Sunny handed him the baby and followed with Eric in her arms to an orange Cadillac owned by Leonard Levinson. This orange Cadillac now contained Rhodes, his new hostage, Jessie and Sunny, and the children. Once they were all in, Rhodes took off again. This guy has a tendency to take dramatic cars. First a Camaro, then a cruiser, and now an orange Cadillac. What are the chances? Honestly, we need some levity in this case because without it, you will be in tears by the end. So they're all off again in the orange Cadillac, traveling down the interstate. But what Rhodes didn't know was that Leonard's wife had a habit of watching him while he walked to the mailbox every day, as he was a little elderly and frail. Leonard's wife phoned the police and told them what had happened. Now this is important because Leonard's wife, she couldn't hear what was happening outside. She could only see through the window what was going on. And she told the police that there was 2 men, 1 woman, 2 children, 1 10-month-old baby, and her husband, an elderly, frail man, in that car. Remember that. The police knew who was in this car. According to both Sunny and Jessie's accounting of facts in testimony in court, Sunny was in the front seat with both children, and Jessie and Leonard were in the back seat. Jessie stated that he kept telling Leonard that he wouldn't be hurt and just stay calm. According to Jessie, after he told Leonard to just stay calm and everything would be fine, that was when he loaded the gun that Rhodes had used to kill officers Black and Irwin. So while they're driving, Sunny is thinking of any way that she can get her and her babies away safely from this nightmare that is happening. And suddenly, she hears helicopters. She knows it's the police, and she thinks, thank God, we're saved, we're going to be safe. And then the car went over the top of a hill, and on the other side of the hill was a roadblock. There was a line of cruisers and trucks, all blocking off the entire road ahead of the Cadillac. In front of the vehicles was a row of officers, all with rifles pointed directly at the orange Cadillac. Now remember, the police were called by Leonard's wife, and they knew there were children in that car, and Leonard, who is an innocent hostage. According to Leonard's wife's testimony, she only saw the 2 men kidnap her husband, and then one of the 2 men go over and remove a woman and her children from the cruiser and put them into the Cadillac. Really, if you were trying to figure out what was going on in this situation, your mind would probably go to 2 men have kidnapped a woman and her children and Leonard. Sunny stated that when she saw the blockade ahead of them, she thought, we are saved. Rhodes started accelerating as if he was planning on slamming into the cruisers. And the minute he sped up, all officers in the line opened fire on the orange Cadillac. Sonny stated in an interview on the podcast Wrongful Convictions that the car was actually bouncing from the amount of gunfire that was hitting it from the police officers. She stated that as soon as the gunfire started, she again dove on top of her children and tried to shield them from the bullets. Rhodes instinctively turned the wheel of the car to the left to get himself away from the gunfire, which only put Sonny and the children ahead of him in the gunfire, and lost control of the Cadillac, and he crashed into one of the transports that was blocking the road. Rhodes was shot in the leg, and by some miracle, no one else is injured, which is crazy considering how many shots were fired on that car. The police pulled Rhodes and Jesse from the car and placed them under arrest. They packed up Rhodes and took him to a hospital because of the gunshot wound in his leg. Jesse, they pulled up from the ground and had him standing outside the car, handcuffed. Sonny was outside the car with the baby in her arms and holding on to Eric, with about 30 guns pointed at her head. According to Sonny, while Jesse was standing outside the car with his hands cuffed behind his back, a police officer came out of the crowd and with the butt end of a rifle smashed Jesse in the face, knocking him to the ground. At that moment, Jesse looked up at Sonny and said, "You better get away from me because they're going to kill me." Sonny stated that she attempted to explain to the police that she and Jesse were just as much hostages as Leonard, but ultimately, this was a double cop killing, and because of that, emotions were running extremely high within law enforcement, and no matter what Sonny was saying, it was literally falling on deaf ears. They had just lost two of their brothers, and it wasn't really up to the officers to figure all of it out. It was just their job to arrest them. Someone else had to figure out what happened later. According to Sonny, she and Jesse were placed into a cruiser and, with a few other cruisers following behind, drove along a very desolated road and stopped at an unused portion of a railway yard nearby where they had stopped the Cadillac. At this point, all of the officers get out of their cruisers and are standing in a group discussing whether they should take these two in or just kill them right there and say that they both tried to escape. Now, I never found any mention of this incident in any of the court records, but that doesn't surprise me that it didn't make it into the court records. I didn't even see it in Jesse's clemency hearing transcripts, which I would have thought I should have, but I'm not saying it didn't happen. This just never made it into a court record. Eventually, according to Sonny, one of the officers had a moment of clarity and convinced the others that the better thing to do was to take Jesse and Sonny into the station and let them face justice that way. At this point, Jesse and Sonny's children were sent to live with Sonny's parents. Thank God the system allowed her parents to take the children. It would have been just another injustice if those kids had have been put into the foster care system. They had already been through enough, I would say. Surviving 2 gunfights by the time you're 10 months old. Who has that as a start? Jesus. We're now at the police station and officers are questioning Sonny. They're asking who did the shooting, what part did you play, on and on and on. According to Sonny, she kept telling them that she couldn't tell them anything because as soon as she heard the first gunshot, she put her head down and covered the children. And she stayed that way until the gunfire stopped. But the detectives that were questioning her didn't believe her and just kept asking her questions. Sonny states that every time she would say, "You're trying to get me to say something that isn't true," the detectives would stop the tape recording and put a new tape in the tape recorder. Jesse was also being interrogated at the same time, and he was facing pretty much the same thing as what Sonny was. Now remember Rhodes? Remember how Rhodes was taken to the hospital? Well, while Rhodes was in his hospital bed, he asked to speak with the prosecutor. Can you guess what's coming? Right. Rhodes had a lengthy criminal record, and he knew that if he was convicted for what happened that day, he was going to get a death sentence. He wanted a deal. I need to tell you about Michael Satz. Michael Satz was the prosecutor. And Michael Satz had a dream, and his dream was to run for district attorney. And with a double cop killing case like this, where he was pretty much guaranteed 3 convictions to have in his pocket, and to be the prosecutor on a case which would be surely high profile in the media, he would be able to win an election for district attorney, no problem at all. So, when Michael Satz arrived at the hospital, he immediately made a deal with Rhodes. Rhodes would testify against both Jesse and Sonny, saying that Jesse and Sonny killed the officers, and Rhodes would accept 3 life sentences for the 2 murders and the kidnapping. At this time in Florida, if the prosecution entered into a plea bargain such as this with a co-defendant, the person getting the plea deal has to give a full detailed confession to the part that they played in the crime, and they had to undergo a polygraph test to make sure that they were telling the truth and weren't the actual killer. And in this case, Rhodes was saying that both Jesse and Sonny were the ones that killed the officers. So Rhodes did the polygraph test, and during the trial, Michael Satz submitted a report to the court that said Rhodes passed the polygraph test with flying colors, meaning that, in fact, it was Jesse and Sonny that killed the officers, and that everything Jesse and Sonny were saying was basically a lie. So now we come to the trials, and honestly, these trials are literal shit shows from beginning to end. First, Jesse and Sonny were tried separately. And in both trials, it was the same judge, which immediately would make me think conflict of interest. If he does one trial and then the second, he's obviously biased. But there's some things you need to know about Judge Daniel Futch. I'm not making that last name up. That's his name. The first thing you need to know is that Futch had recently retired from Highway Patrol, specifically 3 years prior to the start of this case. He wore his Highway Patrol uniform hat to court every single day. He also came to court every day armed with a pistol tucked into the waistband of his pants under his robe. Can you imagine being on trial for the murder of a Highway Patrol officer and have your judge come in wearing a Highway Patrol officer hat every day? The next thing you need to know about Futch is that his nickname was Maximum Dan. He always sentenced the maximum in every case he tried. As well, he had a small toy electric chair on his desk inside the courtroom. And throughout court proceedings, he would play with it and it would go zzz, 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 zzz. Could you imagine? You're on trial for your life and this shit-ass judge is pressing the button on a tiny electric chair, making it zap all through your trial. This guy, oh my God. As if all of that wasn't enough, I have to give you this quote from Futch that appeared in the New York Times in 1974. The article was discussing with Futch why he had revoked parole for a 20-year-old girl who had been convicted of possession of 16 grams of marijuana, which is a little over half an ounce, which is nothing really, not that much. Remember, this was 1974, and marijuana was the devil's lettuce. This was Futch's sentence for this girl. She had to stay in prison until she was able to pass a high school equivalency test, which had taken her 4 months. And then, once she was released on parole after passing the test, she was essentially homeless and had a heart defect. At one point, she had been sent to a halfway house to live, but she was kicked out of the halfway house because she had been late twice, and then on the third time, she was 10 minutes late for curfew. Then she went to live with her sister, but she left there because of family issues, and with nowhere to go, she began living at her mother's house while on parole. But the thing was that during the trial, Futch had deemed her mother as an unfit mother because once in a while, her mom would allow the boyfriend to spend the night. Here's the quote from Futch. "It's like raising a child. They have to know that if they violate parole, they're subject to be spanked." Spanked. He said spanked. And that's the judge in this trial. All in all, this guy sounds like an absolute fucking blast. Next, we are going to look at Jesse's attorney, Robert McCain. Now, if you are ever facing a trial in Florida, this man is the last shit pig you want defending you. During Jesse's trial, this man was dealing with a huge and active drug addiction. And directly after the trials, he was disbarred for bribing witnesses, suppressing evidence, and was involved in drug trafficking. And that was his lawyer. Next, we have Michael Satz, who we've already talked a little bit about. He was horny for the power that the position of district attorney would bring him. And as I said before, he knew that this hugely high-profile case, a double cop killing, would secure the win of district attorney for him. So needless to say, he immediately started playing a game of whacking the one-eyed worm when this case came across his desk. The same year as these trials, he ran and won for district attorney, and during his campaign for the position, he naturally heavily relied on the fact that he had successfully prosecuted 3 cop killers. He entered into this new position as district attorney in 1976, and he kept that position until 2020, which was the first time anyone ran against him. This shit muppet, Satz, literally attached his tongue to Judge Futch's ass, used roads, and railroaded Jesse and Sonny all the way to the electric chair. He is a piece of shit, and it gets worse. Jesse's trial happened first. It lasted a total of 4 days, after which Jesse was found guilty of first-degree murder. During Jesse's trial, Futch, aka Maximum Dan, refused to sequester the jury, and every potential juror was asked if they had heard of this case, and every single one of them said yes, and Maximum Dan refused to sequester that jury. Instead, he instructed the jury not to discuss the trial or watch any news reports, read any articles, or listen to any radio broadcasts about the case. Yeah, I'm so sure that worked. That's like telling a kid, don't touch that candy that I've left sitting on the coffee table. Don't touch it. And what does the kid do the instant the adult's back is turned? They snag that sugary goodness and stuff it all in their mouth at once. This was a hugely publicized case at the time. Everyone was talking about it. It was all over every news platform. You couldn't take a piss without the guy at the next urinal talking to you about it. During Jesse's trial, 2 eyewitnesses, 2 truck drivers, stated that the man in brown, which was Jesse, was thrown over the hood of the car and was there while all the shots were fired on the 2 police officers. And then there was Rhodes testifying that both Jesse and Sonny had guns and shot the 2 officers, and that he had run to the back of the Camaro to take cover from the shooting because he was so scared. What a piece of dirt. Robert McCain, Jesse's lawyer, didn't call one witness or ask any questions of any of the witnesses that the prosecutor put on the stand. And if that wasn't bad enough, during that 4-day trial, Jesse tried to file motions to allow witnesses for himself to take the stand, But Maximum Dan refused to accept any motions submitted on Jesse's behalf. So Jesse was largely convicted on Rhodes's testimony, which is such bullshit because a person should never be convicted on a co-defendant's testimony in any crime, but especially in a murder case. In a murder case, there's really only two people who know exactly what happened, the killer and the victim. And the victim isn't talking. The first one to make the deal will pin everything on the other one and take the lighter sentence. Everyone knows that. That's logical. But it happened. On the fourth day, the jury came back with a guilty verdict, but suggested that Jesse receive a life sentence for his participation in the killing of the two police officers. However, at that time, in Florida, a judge could throw out the jury's suggested sentence and deliver whatever he wanted to, and that is just what Maximum Dan did. He threw out the jury's suggested sentence of life in prison and sentenced Jesse to die by electrocution. Sunny's trial lasted 2 weeks, and hers pretty much went about the same as Jesse's. Sunny's lawyer decided that they weren't going to put out any type of defense. Okay, I'm sure that'll work. He said that because there was no actual physical or forensic evidence against Sunny, by not putting up a defense, it would give him a better position during the closing arguments. I have thought hard about that statement, and I can't for the fucking life of me figure out why in any universe someone would think this. I have no idea what thought process her public defender was using at this moment. And if that wasn't bad enough, again, the judge in Sunny's trial was good old Maximum Dan, which is a conflict of interest. Sunny and her lawyer tried to get Futch to recuse himself, as it was a conflict of interest. But Judge Maximum Dan ruled that there was no conflict of interest, and he refused to recuse himself from the case. Leonard Levinson, the man who was taken hostage, testified at Sunny's trial and said that he never heard Sunny say or do anything which led him to think that she was responsible for his predicament. However, he did testify that Sunny nodded in agreement when Jesse told Leonard that they needed the Cadillac to take a sick baby to the hospital. So I don't really understand that. Sunny didn't mention anything about that in her interview. I mean, it could very well be that Sunny was in the back of the car and was nodding just to try and keep Leonard alive. I don't know. I found it only in one court record about this nodding that Sunny apparently did in Leonard's testimony, and other than that, it was never mentioned again. Next, in Sunny's trial, the prosecution brought out a jailhouse snitch as a witness against Sunny. This girl and her boyfriend, this was a young girl, she and her boyfriend were in jail on some minor drug charges, and Michael Satz, the shit muppet, told this young girl that if she went into Sunny's cell block and got Sunny to confess to killing the police officers, that both she and her boyfriend would be released the next day. And if this girl couldn't get Sunny to confess, Satz said he would make sure that she and her boyfriend both went to prison for a long, long time, and that it would ruin her life, her parents' life, and she would never be allowed back into university, and her life would be over. Gee, I wonder what she testified to on the stand. According to the jailhouse snitch, while in the same cell block, not jail cell, but cell block, with Sunny for one night, apparently Sunny told her that she herself had shot and killed the two police officers and that she enjoyed it and she would do it again if she had a chance. I'm absolutely certain that Sunny decided to trust an absolute stranger in a cell block while on trial for a double cop killing. Right. Absolutely. The jury asked Maximum Dan if they could convict Sunny on a lesser charge, such as accomplice to the murders, because they didn't think that she was guilty of the murders. But Maximum Dan instructed the jury that they had to draw a verdict on the charges in front of them, and they could not alter the charges in any way. So the jury members later stated that from those instructions from Maximum Dan, they felt as though they had no choice but to convict Sonny. So they came back with a guilty verdict, but recommended a sentence of life. But the good old shit muppet Maximum Dan once again threw out the jury's sentence and sentenced Sonny to life in prison for the kidnapping of Leonard Levinson and death by electrocution for the murders of Officer Black and Officer Irwin. At the time that she was sentenced to death, Sonny was the only woman in Florida to be on death row. Just prior to Jesse and Sonny's trials, there had been a 3-year moratorium on the death sentence, and the result of that was that almost all death sentences in Florida had been commuted to life in prison. There were no women on death row, and only a very few men. So at this point, there was no death row for women in Florida, and the prison officials didn't know what they were going to do with Sonny. They had nowhere to put her. So what they did was they cleared out a small building that was used previously as a place to throw people if, say, there was a riot and they had to arrest a lot of people at once. Sonny stated that it was literally a dungeon. It was one hallway with 6 or 8 cells on either side of the hall, and in front of the hallway was an office where the guards would stay. The building was inside another prison, but it was surrounded by its own barbed wire fence. So she was essentially in a prison within a prison. Sonny was the only person within that building, and she was kept in her cell 24 hours a day. It was 6 steps from the door to the toilet, and if she reached her arms out, she could touch both side walls of her cell. There was a metal shelf with a thin mattress, which was her bed, and there was a toilet and sink combination, and that was all that was in that cell. Sonny spent the first 5 years of what would be a 17-year stretch inside that tiny cell. She was isolated from everyone and everything. It took 5 years for her first appeal to come up. And because of Maximum Dan overruling the jury and not giving a sufficient written reason why he was overruling the jury, her sentence was changed from death to life. And it was at that time that they put her into general prison population. I want you to imagine that for 5 years you are kept inside the tiniest room with no windows and stone walls. You're not allowed to talk to anyone. No one talks to you. And that's it. And then all of a sudden, without warning, without any help, without any preparation, you are taken out of that room after 5 years and thrown into a room with potentially 100 to 200 people. What do you think would be your reaction? That in itself is cruel and unusual punishment. Not that keeping her in a tiny cell for 5 years, isolated, and not letting her outside wasn't cruel and unusual punishment, but so was the transition into general population. This just gets worse from here, and it's been pretty bad up to this point, but strap in because the last part of the story is unreal. So Sonny's sentence has been commuted to life. And a year after Sonny's sentence was commuted, both of her parents were killed in a plane crash. Jesse and Sonny's children, thankfully, were not on the plane with Sonny's parents at the time. Christina, their daughter, was 6 at the time of the plane crash. And once Sonny's parents were killed, Eric and Christina were separated from each other and sent to foster homes. In Christina's case, after a couple of years with her foster family, she was sent to a boarding school for children with behavioral problems, and she was kept there until she was 18. After all these kids have been through, you would think that keeping them together would be priority number one, but no, they just caused more trauma to these children. I swear, people that work in children's aid, well, we call it children's aid here in Canada. They call it DCFS in the States. Anyway, I swear that the people who make these decisions in those agencies do not ever stop to think how this decision is going to affect the children. Bunch of asshats. While all this was happening, Rhodes was enjoying his 3 life sentences in jail, was bragging about how he was the one who shot the 2 police officers, and because he was just so fucking smart, he had managed to get 2 other people, that being Sonny and Jesse, to be convicted, and both were now sitting on death row for what he did. Piece of shit. Rhodes, you're gonna get yours. Karma is a bitch. She doesn't like not getting hers. On a couple of occasions, while Rhodes was puffing his chest in jail, a few prisoners that weren't his cellmates overheard him talking and heard the entire story of how he was the one who killed the 2 police officers. These prisoners were willing to go to court and testify against Rhodes, but shit muppet Maximum Dan stated that a prisoner's word wasn't believable and he would not entertain the idea of allowing a prisoner to testify against another prisoner. Let me repeat that last sentence. Maximum Dan wouldn't allow a prisoner to testify in favor of another prisoner because a prisoner's testimony couldn't be believed. Okay, wait, let me see if I can get this right. It's okay for a co-defendant who is technically a prisoner to testify against their co-defendants who are also prisoners? Oh, okay. Come on, Dan. What the fuck? You fucking shit muppet. Jesse and Sonny maintained their marriage through letters to each other the entire time they were in prison. When they heard about Rhodes bragging and that the prisoners were willing to testify against him, Jesse wrote in a letter to Sonny, "I told you, babe, we'd be going home. And keep your spirits up. This is all gonna work out. We're going home, babe." At the hearing about allowing the prisoners to testify against Rhodes and him confessing to the killings, that was the last time that Sonny and Jesse would ever see each other in person. The next thing that happened was that Sonny's lawyer died of a heart attack. In her interview on the Wrongful Convictions podcast, which you should definitely go listen to, it's fascinating to hear her account firsthand. Sonny says that one piece of advice she would give anybody who's facing death row is to hire a very young lawyer so that they don't die during the appeals process because it takes so long. I'm so glad she has a sense of humor after all of this clusterfuck that she's been through. Luckily, 2 younger lawyers that were working under her now deceased lawyer agreed to continue to represent her because they believed in her innocence. 11 years after her conviction, Sonny was given access to a private investigator by these 2 young lawyers. Sonny wanted to find the jailhouse snitch that had testified against her during her original trial. But Sonny's 2 lawyers told her, just forget about that girl. She's a drug addict. She's probably dead by now. But that girl wasn't dead. When the girl was released after testifying against Sonny, the girl cleaned up her act immediately and moved to Wyoming. At the time, was taking care of her ailing father and a family of her own. The private investigator found this girl, and Sonny's lawyers went out to Wyoming to speak with her. When they told her what had happened to Sunny because of her testimony, this girl broke. She told them she had never really thought about Sunny after that day in court, and that being arrested and thrown into jail scared the shit out of her, and she decided to straighten herself out. Too bad it didn't work that way for everybody who gets picked up, huh? But this girl was absolutely devastated about what happened to Sunny. The girl told Sunny's lawyers that she would do anything she could to help Sunny, except go back to Florida. This girl was absolutely terrified of Michael Satz, who had threatened to destroy her life, and who had won the election for district attorney and had even more power than he did when he threatened to ruin her life 11 years earlier. Unless she physically came back to Florida and got on that stand and was cross-examined by the prosecution, Sunny's team couldn't use her in any of Sunny's appeals. When the prosecution in Florida found out that they had found the jailhouse snitch, they sent a couple of their men who worked in the prosecutor's office out to Wyoming to speak with that girl's father, who, remember, is ailing and sick and dying. And the two men tried to, quote unquote, convince her father to instruct his daughter to stay in Wyoming and not get involved in Sunny Jacobs' case. I don't know exactly what was said to this girl's father by these two hoodlums from the prosecutor's office, but just by even speaking to her father made that girl angry enough to agree to come back to Florida and testify. So now there's a federal hearing, and the jailhouse snitch girl takes the stand, and she tells the court everything that had happened to her, everything that Michael Satz had threatened her with about ruining her life, ruining her boyfriend's life, and telling them that if they didn't come up with a quote-unquote confession from Sunny, their lives were over and they would be in prison forever. This poor girl cried unconsolably on the stand and just profusely apologized to Sunny. Then the prosecutor stood up, and as he approached the girl who was sitting on the stand, this girl started hyperventilating. And as he got closer and closer to the stand, she grabbed her chest and had a heart attack right there on the stand. I am not shitting you in any way, shape, or form. This girl had a heart attack from the prosecutor approaching her. That is how scared this Michael Satz had this girl. And this is 11 years after the fact. So that just gives you like an inkling as to how manipulating, terrifying, and powerful Michael Satz was in his positions. This is just unreal. Can you imagine being Sunny, sitting there in court, hearing all the testimony that could potentially free you from prison, only to watch the one person who can save you fall over from a fucking heart attack? Oh my God. Remember, unless that prosecutor was allowed to cross-examine the jailhouse snitch, all of the jailhouse snitch's testimony would be stricken from the record. You can't use testimony from anyone unless both sides have an opportunity to question them. I'm telling you, I felt like I got an ulcer from researching this case because my heart is just pounding and I have so much stress, and we're still not done. It still carries on. Thankfully, this girl lived. When she got out of hospital, she went directly back to Wyoming and left Florida without being cross-examined. But thank God, the judge in the federal case agreed to allow her testimony to be submitted to the record by video. You know what that means. Road trip. So all of the lawyers, Sonny's lawyers and the prosecution, went out to Wyoming and did the cross-examination out there on video and brought it back and submitted it to the court. I just can't believe this next part. In the end, the judge in the federal appeal, where the jailhouse snitch testified of what happened to her by Michael Satz, the judge ruled that it was the word of a former drug addict against the word of the now district attorney and upstanding all-around guy, Michael Satz, aka Shit Muppet. Once again, another of Sonny's appeals was denied. Jesse had gone through all of his appeals, and unfortunately, everything was denied. Even though Rhodes had recanted his testimony and confessed to the killings of Officer Black and Officer Irwin in 1977, 1979, and 1982. But even with all those times of Rhodes confessing to the killing of the police officers, 15 years after his conviction, Jesse received his third death warrant, which basically means you have no more appeals and it was time for him to be electrocuted. On May 4th, 1990, at 43 years old, Jesse was allowed to have a 10-minute phone call with Sonny. One of the last things he said to her was, "They'll remember my name." He told his daughter Christina to be brave, and then a few hours later, he was escorted to the death chamber. Once inside the death chamber, Jesse faced old Sparky, an oak electric chair built by prisoners in the 1920s. Jesse was strapped into the chair. A sponge was placed on his shaved head, then a metal helmet strapped over that. The executioner flipped the switch, and the first wave of electricity was sent through to Jesse's body. Jesse's fists clenched, his body slammed up, then back into the chair, as much as it could within the restraints. The electricity was shut off. Jesse was still breathing, nodding slightly, most likely from the pain coursing through his body like the current that had just ended. The executioner sent another jolt of electricity through to Jesse. An overwhelming buzzing sound filled both the execution chamber and the witness room. Suddenly, smoke appeared to come from under the metal helmet on Jesse's head, immediately followed by flames. Flames that shot up to a foot in the air. Jesse's entire body clenched. The electricity stopped. Jesse was still breathing. A third and final jolt of electricity was sent through. It took 13 and a half minutes for Jesse to die. The word throughout the prison community was that someone working for the prison, had replaced the natural sea sponge in the helmet for an artificial sponge. An artificial sponge would not conduct the flow of electricity as effectively as a natural sponge would. The intention, according to those whispers, was clear: to inflict as much pain as possible on the double cop killer. After Jesse was horrifically executed, it was discovered that prosecutor Michael Satz had created a false report regarding the polygraph test, that in fact Rhodes had failed the polygraph test. He was lying when he said that Jesse killed the police officers. As well, Michael Satz, Shit Muppet, had also suppressed another report that stated the results of a gunshot residue test on Rhodes, Sonny, and Jesse. The results of the report stated that no gunshot residue was found on Sonny. A very minimal amount was found on Jesse, but a large amount of gunshot residue was found on Rhodes's hands. This indicated that Rhodes was the only one who had fired a gun that day. And this man, Michael Satz, was the district attorney from 1976 until 2020. Florida. How many other people were executed or sent to prison for life while this fucking bastard was in power? This is why people in high spots within the court system or law enforcement should not get their jobs based on a popular vote. These two suppressed evidence that would exonerate Jesse from killing both officers. Sunny used these two items in her appeals, and 17 years after this nightmare started, 2 years after her husband was horribly executed, she agreed to enter an Alford plea and was released with time served. An Alford plea is a guilty plea in which a defendant maintains their innocence but admits that the prosecution's evidence would likely result in a guilty verdict if brought to trial. Today, Sunny is married and lives in Ireland. Interestingly enough, her new husband, Peter Pringle, was also wrongfully convicted for murder in Ireland and spent more than 15 years on death row, just like Sunny. Peter and Sunny both love yoga, meditation, and swimming, vegetarian food, and living in the countryside. In 2012, they began welcoming exonerees into their home. In 2014, Peter and Sunny established the Sunny Sanctuary. They were able to extend their assistance more broadly to exonerees than just in their home, and they use a unique holistic approach encompassing physical, mental, and spiritual healing with ongoing support. There is a Sunny Healing Retreat in Ireland and a Sunny Living Center in Florida, which they opened in 2014. It's a housing complex in Tampa for exonerees. In 2020, their mission again expanded to helping the families and others who've been affected by the injustice of a wrongful conviction. They also extended their healing techniques to the general public. Although Sunny and Peter initially focused exclusively on exonerees, they now realize that what they have to offer can benefit anyone struggling with the injustices and inequalities of life in these times. They have made their videos available to the general public. I will link the website to this in the show notes because this is just amazing. And how insane is it that Sunny goes through all of this and then meets Peter, who also went through the exact same thing? Isn't that crazy? It's wonderful. And that is the horrifically tragic case of Jesse Tafero and Sunny Jacobs. My thoughts. Rage clouds the eyes of those who are fueling it. It's almost impossible to see and acknowledge the truth of a situation when one's mind is clouded with rage. Police officers have a sacred brotherhood that is admirable. When one falls, they all expect justice and will stop at nothing to acquire it. I don't feel as though blame for what happened to Jesse and Sunny falls on the shoulders of the police. Did the police act inappropriately when they were apprehending Jesse and Sunny? Yes. Should Rhodes have received the death penalty for killing officers Black and Irwin? Yes. In the USA, just by being in the wrong spot at the wrong time, a person can find themselves being charged and convicted of crimes they had nothing to do with, which is terrifying. But in this case, I believe the actual criminals got away scot-free. Judge Daniel Futch and District Attorney Michael Satz used threats, intimidation, lies. They concealed evidence that would have exonerated Jesse and Sunny, all for their own personal gain. And in Futch's case, it seems amusement. These two men went on to have successful careers. The injustices that Jesse, Sunny, and their entire family suffered are immense. The psychological ramifications from these two wrongful convictions of murder are staggering. Facing the death penalty, individuals often grapple with the compounded trauma of wrongful incarceration and the impending finality of execution. for most of us, this would be too much to bear. These stories of innocent people who are convicted or worse, executed, evoke a sense of societal responsibility in each of us, or at least it should. It highlights the urgent need for reform in legal practices and the justice system. It raises the question, can a flawed system justly impose a sentence from which there is no return? When roles in high positions within law enforcement and the court system are filled through a voting process, there is a risk of prioritizing popularity or political allegiance over merit and expertise. These positions are critical aspects in maintaining the integrity and efficacy of the justice system as a whole. And when shitfucks like Futch and Sats are voted in, impartiality takes a header right into a toilet filled with swamp shit. By emphasizing the work experience and track record of those we place in office, we as a society ensure that those entrusted with significant authority are equipped with the knowledge and skills necessary to navigate complex cases and make crucial, impartial decisions. Jesse's story is a haunting testament to the flaws within the justice system, where the lines between right and wrong were blurred under the weight of ambition and corruption. Wrongfully convicted for crimes they did not commit, Jesse and Sonny found themselves ensnared in a web of deceit, woven by a crooked prosecutor intent on securing quick convictions, and a judge who turned a blind eye to the glaring evidence of their innocence. Jesse and Sonny found themselves at the mercy of a system that was meant to protect the innocent, not to kill and destroy. They clung to hope, yet each encounter with Futch and Sats's justice system chipped away at their resolve. In that Florida courtroom, justice was not blind. There were no scales evenly balanced, only manipulation, erosion of trust, and betrayal. Jesse's horrific execution serves as a chilling reminder of the irreversible consequences of unchecked power. That was a horribly sad case. I literally had tears while I was listening to Sunny tell her story and researching this case. I read the transcripts of one of Jesse's clemency hearings, and you can feel the pleading for his life while he's talking to the panel. Whew. I think we'll leave it there for this week. If you enjoyed this show, please head over to Patreon page. Give us some love. Your support is what keeps the lights on and allows me to continue to bring you these episodes each week. Don't forget, if you're on Apple, give us a 5-star review. It really does help the show. Stay safe and enjoy your day today. This has been a Bitter Witness production.